There was a picture on the mantel that Mark Grayson hated more than he hated anything in that house, and God knew there was plenty to hate. He never said it aloud, of course. That wasn't the Grayson way. But whenever he walked into the living room of his childhood home, his eyes went straight to it, unbidden, like muscle memory. A family portrait. Richard Grayson in a crisp charcoal suit, towering with quiet authority. One manicured hand rested on Nathan's shoulder. The younger son, the favorite, flashing his trademark effortless grin. Mark stood on the opposite side, just slightly apart. No hand on his shoulder, no easy smile. At 16, Mark had already known what that distance meant. At 28, he still felt it burn in the pit of his stomach, like acid. "Mark?" His mother's voice echoed faintly from the hall. "Your father wants to go over the guest list again." Of course he did. Richard Grayson ran his birthday parties like board meetings, controlled, exact, overstaffed, and underloved. Mark straightened his spine and gave the photo one last glance. Nathan, he thought bitterly, probably got a handshake and a whiskey. Mark got the schedule. The old man was in his study when Mark walked in, seated behind an oak desk that seemed more throne than furniture. Richard didn't look up. "Nathan will handle the speeches. I want you on logistics. No mistakes. No greeting. No how have you been. Just orders." "Sure, Dad." Mark took the clipboard from the desk. "Whatever you say." A pause. Then Richard looked up. "Try to wear something presentable. We're having press." Mark nodded once, jaw clenched. He already had the suit picked out. Gray, tailored, identical to the one Nathan had worn to last year's gala. He could match Nathan in fabric, posture, tone, but never in his father's eyes. As he left the study, he heard laughter spill down the hall like champagne fizz. Nathan, of course, holding court in the kitchen. Their mother, Elaine, was giggling in a way she rarely did anymore. The staff were smiling. Even the caterer, a young woman with tired eyes, was leaning in like she couldn't help herself. Mark hovered in the doorway, unseen. Nathan had that ability to make people forget themselves. The way he joked with the florist, slipped into Spanish with the cleaning lady, made Elaine throw her head back like she was still young. He was charming in a way Mark never could be, and he knew it. "Mark," Nathan called out suddenly, sensing him like a sixth sense. "Come weigh in? Duck or filet?" A dozen eyes turned. Mark hesitated, then forced a smile. Whichever's cheaper. Laughter. Nathan's most of all. Spoken like a man of the people, he grinned. "But come on, live a little." Mark didn't reply. He stepped back into the hall and kept walking. Later that evening, after the caterers had packed up and the house fell into its usual hush, Mark found himself in the den, nursing a drink, flipping through the old Grayson family photo albums that Elaine kept stacked like relics. He wasn't sure why he opened them. Maybe masochism. Maybe hope. Nathan's childhood was documented in full color. Birthday parties, tennis tournaments, summer camps, ski trips. Every page was a shrine. Mark's photos were fewer, blurry, awkwardly lit, often with him half cut from the frame. One in particular made his chest tighten. He must have been 11. It was his science fair. He remembered it vividly, the hours spent building the volcano, getting the pressure ratio just right. In the photo, he was holding the blue ribbon, beaming. Richard wasn't there. Elaine stood next to him, distracted. In the background, barely visible, Nathan was playing tag with someone. Mark shut the album hard and drained his glass. The next day, it started small, a flicker of something ugly beneath Nathan's smile. It was during brunch when Richard asked who'd be attending from the business circle. "Tom Whitaker RSVP'd last night," Mark said, scanning his phone. "He's bringing his wife." Richard looked up sharply. "I told Nathan to call Tom personally." "I did," Nathan said, buttering a croissant. "But maybe I wasn't enough of a draw." Mark glanced up. "Or maybe he just prefers emails." Nathan smirked. "Sure, Mark. I'm sure that's it." Richard's gaze swung to Mark, expression unreadable. "Next time, confirm before you report." Mark opened his mouth, then closed it. He could feel the old heat rising in his chest, the feeling of being 10 years old again, accused of something he didn't do, while Nathan sat glowing in innocence. Elaine cleared her throat gently. "Let's not make this a thing." But it already was. That night, Mark stood on the balcony outside his room, the Atlantic wind pulling at his sleeves. He stared out at the dark ocean, then down at the lawn, where Nathan was throwing a tennis ball to Richard's dog, the only living creature besides Elaine who ever got affection from the old man. Mark watched Nathan laugh as the dog chased the ball. Richard chuckled softly, leaning against the railing. It looked like a postcard. Father and son, perfectly in sync. He hated that it still hurt. He hated that he wanted what Nathan had. He hated that, deep down, he didn't know if he hated Nathan or envied him. And then, as if summoned, Nathan looked up. Their eyes locked across the distance. For a moment, neither moved. Then Nathan raised a hand in lazy salute, turned back to the dog, and threw the ball again. Mark stood frozen, the ocean roaring below him, a single thought pounding in his chest. This family was going to break. The only question was, who would make the first move? The house was quieter now. Grief had drained it of sound. After Elaine Grayson's funeral, the guests drifted off in polite silence, leaving behind a wake of untouched food and hollow condolence. Mark stood alone in the sunroom, a room his mother had once filled with orchids and music, watching the ocean she loved so much claw at the horizon. He had expected the loss to hurt, but not like this, not with so much unfinished between them. They'd never had the kind of heart-to-hearts television sold you. His mother had loved him in a vague, distracted way, a kind of gentle weather pattern that never settled long in one place. She fussed over Nathan. She talked to Mark. He hadn't cried at the funeral. Nathan had, of course, loudly, beautifully, the kind of tears that drew sympathy like bees to sugar. He clung to Richard during the burial, and for once, Richard didn't pull away. It wasn't until the reading of the will, days later behind closed doors, that the emotional undercurrent finally capsized. "I want to start," Richard said, "by making something clear." The lawyer blinked, hesitating. "Of course, Mr. Grayson, but—" "I'll speak first," Richard said, in the tone of a man used to being obeyed. He turned to Mark and Nathan, seated across from him at the long mahogany table in the study. "Your mother left a portion of her personal accounts to both of you. She was sentimental. I respected that." Mark didn't move. Nathan shifted in his seat. "And you?" "I've decided to gift the Beechcliff property to Nathan," Richard said flatly, "as a thank you for everything he's done for this family." Mark blinked slowly. "The Beechcliff estate?" Nathan's mouth fell open. "Dad, that place is worth—" "I know what it's worth," Richard said, voice cutting clean as a blade. "You've earned it?" "And what about me?" Mark asked, not raising his voice. "What do I get?" Richard turned to him with something that almost resembled pity, except it was colder, clinical. "You get what you've always had, responsibility, expectations, the Grayson name. That should be enough." Mark felt something shift inside his chest, a crack, quiet but catastrophic. Still, he managed a calm nod. "So, nothing." "I wouldn't say that," Richard said. "I've ensured your financial future is stable. You've always valued modesty." It was a mockery, and Mark knew it. The lawyer, clearly uncomfortable, shuffled the paperwork. "We can proceed to signatures." "No," Mark said quietly. "Not yet. I want to hear it from him." Richard tilted his head. Mark's jaw tensed. "Why him, and not me?" Silence. Then Richard leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady, unreadable. "Because respect isn't bought, Mark, and I'm not obligated to love you the same way I love him." The room went still. The sentence landed like a physical blow. Nathan flinched. "Dad!" "No," Mark said. "Let him speak." Richard didn't blink. "You were always dutiful, predictable. You did what was expected, and that has value. But Nathan—" He looked at his younger son with something almost like pride. "Nathan has vision, fire. He challenges me." "He lies to you," Mark said, voice level. "He reminds me of myself," Richard replied, as if that was the highest compliment a man could give. Mark stood. His hands were trembling, but he kept them in his pockets. His voice didn't rise. It never did. But something in his tone was sharper now, steel under velvet. "For years, I thought if I just worked harder, if I was quieter, smarter, more useful, maybe you'd see me. Not even love, just see." Richard looked at him like he was a spreadsheet gone wrong. "Don't be dramatic." Mark exhaled through his nose. "You really don't know how cruel you are, do you?" "I'm honest," Richard said. "No," Mark said. "You're a coward, and you just lost the last person who made you look human." He left the study without signing anything. That night, Mark stood in Elaine's sunroom again, the orchids long gone. Outside, Nathan was on the patio drinking champagne from the estate cellar, already celebrating. Inside, Mark stared at his reflection in the darkened glass. There was no breakdown, no shouting, no smashed crystal or storming exits, But in his chest, something had finally died, the part of him that clung to the idea that someday, somehow, Richard Grayson would be proud of him. He poured himself a drink. Bourbon, neat. His mother's piano stood untouched in the corner. He remembered her playing Debussy on foggy mornings while Nathan slept in. He remembered her soft, nervous glances when Richard raised his voice. She hadn't been strong, but she had tried, in her own way, to soften the edges of the world for Mark. Now she was gone, and with her went the last thread tethering him to forgiveness. He raised the glass to his lips and whispered, "To no one? Then I choose not to forgive you either." The Grayson family's Sunday dinners had become rituals, like church or funerals. Every second month, Richard insisted on gathering everyone at the estate for what he called family continuity. The phrase made Mark wince every time he heard it. Continuity? As if their interactions were legacy-bound, contractual, a thing to preserve on paper rather than feel. Nathan always arrived early, full of laughter and cologne, some fresh accolade tucked under his arm like a trophy. He worked in private equity now, or maybe international development. The label changed depending on which country he'd just flown back from. Mark arrived exactly on time. Never late, never early. His wife Emma, always by his side, poised, polite, lovely in the way that made Richard nod approvingly without ever asking her a real question. Emma watched, always watching from her place at Mark's side. She smiled at Nathan's jokes, nodded at Richard's business commentary, and touched Mark's hand under the table when his jaw went tight. He rarely smiled at these dinners anymore, but he never argued either. That, in Richard's mind, was something close to loyalty. On one such evening, Nathan was recounting a dinner he'd attended in Dubai, something about a prince or a fintech visionary, Mark wasn't sure, when Richard interrupted. "You know," he said, setting down his fork, "Nathan has a talent. People gravitate toward him. That can't be taught." Across the table, Mark took a sip of wine. His grip on the stem was just tight enough to blanch his knuckles. Nathan, humble as ever, chuckled. "It's just about reading the room," Richard smiled. "It's instinct, same as your old man." Emma glanced at Mark. She knew the signs, the way his foot began to tap under the table, how he blinked slower when he was pushing something down. She reached for his hand. Mark didn't move. "Some of us don't read the room. We study it, build it, pay for it." Silence. The table froze for half a breath. Then Nathan laughed, spoken like a true engineer. But Richard didn't laugh. He stared at Mark for a long moment before saying, "That's the difference, son. You build things, Nathan moves them." Later, in the car, Emma said nothing for a long time. Mark kept his eyes on the road, headlights slicing the dark. "He doesn't even know what you do," she said finally. "I know. He still thinks you're managing that old development firm. I let him think that. You have your own company. You've built something from the ground up, and he treats you like an intern." Mark's hands tightened on the wheel. "He doesn't want what I've built," he said. "He only respects what he can see in a press release or shake hands with at a gala. Nathan gives him that." Emma was quiet again. Then, "It's not just about him anymore." Mark glanced over. "You're changing," she said gently. "I've seen it. You're folding into yourself, one layer at a time." He didn't respond. "You don't laugh as much. You're always tired. When we're with them, you look like you're somewhere else." "Maybe I am." She hesitated. "Is it resentment?" "A beat." "Yes." His voice was soft but final. Emma looked out the window. "It's starting to feel like a storm's coming, and I don't think they even see the cloud." At the next dinner, it rained. Not the dramatic, cinematic downpour Mark sometimes imagined in his darker moods, just a quiet drizzle, steady, annoying. It streaked the windows and made the chandelier light glisten like teardrops overhead. Richard was talking about a foundation gala. Nathan was on the board, of course. "We need to present a united family," Richard said. "Nathan will speak. Emma, you'll attend with Mark. Make sure he wears the tux, not the suit. Perception matters." Mark smiled without humor. "And here I thought you liked my modesty." Richard looked at him, that same unreadable expression as always. "I like results." And Image Nathan, sensing the tension, tried to pivot. "Mark, maybe you should come early. We can talk strategy. It'd be fun, like old times." Emma watched Mark carefully. She could feel the weight in the air, thickening. Mark took a slow sip of water, then said lightly, "There were no old times, just different versions of pretending." Nathan blinked. "Come on." Richard slammed his napkin down. "Not hard. just enough to command attention. "You come into my house," he said, voice low, "and speak like a bitter child. That's not the son your mother raised." Something inside Mark bristled. "No," he said, "it's the one you did." Richard stood. "So did I," Emma whispered. It was so soft only Mark heard. He didn't say anything as he rose. "We're leaving." Nathan stood too. "Mark, don't!" But Mark was already walking. Emma followed, calm but purposeful, leaving silence behind them like a broken glass. In the car, Emma finally exhaled. "It's coming, isn't it?" Mark stared out at the windshield, the rain like static. It always was. It began with a toast. Richard Grayson was being honored at a black tie gala hosted by the Grayson Family Foundation. A night of velvet tuxedos, diamond brooches, and self-congratulation. The ballroom glittered with donors and politicos. A string quartet played near the bar. Every detail was curated, from the gold foil menus to the flower arrangements in the shape of the foundation's initials. Nathan was, of course, the MC. He stood at the podium glowing with practiced charm, praising his father's vision, his drive, his integrity. Mark sat at the head table with Emma, silent, his expression carved from stone. He wore the tuxedo, just as requested. But inside, he felt like something foreign was wearing his skin, observing through him. Richard sat to Nathan's right, a small, satisfied smile etched into his face. When Nathan raised his glass, the room followed. "To a man who built an empire from nothing," Nathan said, "who taught us all what it means to be strong, to lead, to demand the best from those around him. To our father." Applause. Flashbulbs. Emma didn't raise her glass. Mark did, then stood. The room quieted, not out of reverence, but confusion. Mark rarely spoke in public. He was the invisible brother, the steady presence who drifted in and out of events like smoke. This wasn't part of the program. "Thank you, Nathan," Mark said. "That was impressive." A few polite chuckles. Richard arched an eyebrow. "I'd like to add a few words if I may," Mark said. Nathan's smile faltered. "Of course." Mark turned to the crowd, glass still in hand. "My brother is right. Richard Grayson built something incredible. Not just wealth, myth. He's a master of it. The self-made man, the legacy, the ideal family, perfect sons, a loving wife. It's a good story." The air shifted. Mark's voice didn't rise. He didn't need volume, only precision. But stories are carefully told, selectively, and sometimes what's left out says more than what's kept in. A few heads turned. Emma watched him with breathless stillness. "My father taught me many things. How to show up on time, how to hide disappointment, how to shrink myself so someone else could shine." Silence. "But he also taught me how to survive without affection, how to succeed quietly because praise would never come, and how to wear a suit while slowly being erased." Richard stood. "That's enough." "No," Mark said. "Not tonight." Nathan looked stricken. "Mark, what are you doing?" "What you never could," Mark said, eyes locked on his father. "Telling the truth." He turned back to the room. "My brother was always the chosen one. The stories, the attention, the praise, it was fed to him like oxygen. Me? I was the draft horse behind the scenes. Reliable, replaceable, tolerated, not treasured." "Mark," Richard said coldly, "if this is about the house, this is about a lifetime." Mark's voice cracked, just slightly, but he steadied it. "It's about watching my mother flinch when you raised your voice. It's about being told that love wasn't promised, that fairness wasn't owed, that he was fire and I was furniture." A stunned silence fell over the room. The string quartet had stopped. Even the servers froze mid-pour. Emma rose beside him. She didn't speak, only slid her hand into his. Mark looked down at his father. "You broke something in me years ago, and I tried to fix it by working harder, by succeeding, by being good. But it was never about being good enough. It was about being him." Nathan looked stricken. "Mark, I never wanted—" "I know," Mark said. "And maybe that's the saddest part. You didn't have to want it. It just happened anyway." Richard's face was pale now, angry, embarrassed, wounded, or perhaps just exposed. "You've made your point," he said through clenched teeth. "No," Mark said. "Not yet." He turned one final time to the crowd, the donors, the family friends, the partners, and press. "Let this be the legacy," he said. "Not a myth, a mirror. Families aren't built on wealth. They're built on truth. And ours was built on silence." He set the glass down without drinking. No applause. No one moved. They didn't speak in the car. Emma only glanced sideways once and whispered, "I'm proud of you." Mark stared out the windshield at the quiet city, lights blurring through the glass. "I think I'm finally free," he said. And for the first time in his life, he almost believed it.